You may have noticed if you look a little bit further south at the events in Nigeria this week, where the election had to be postponed by 1 week because there weren't enough ballots available. And actually, if you look back, elections had started in a number of Nigerian states that morning, and then it had to be stopped. And I think Nigeria gives us a lot of very worrisome lessons as we look at Egypt. We had in place in Nigeria a very good election commission made up of very fine individuals who intended to make a clear break with the way Nigerian elections have been going over the last several years. But good intentions alone are not going to get us through the September elections. It's going to take a lot of money to make up for the accelerated time schedule that the military has imposed upon the country. And I think that's going to be one of the most important things U.S. government can do, is to support that election process. If you look at any of the immediate analyses of what's gone wrong in Nigeria, they say it's because they attempted too many elections in too short a period of time. And I'm afraid that's what we're going to be hearing towards the end of the year, unless some things start to change pretty quickly. On the constitutional referendum, I have to say I was surprised that turnout wasn't higher. And I know that in previous elections, probably 9% to 12% actually voted in those elections, although the Mubarak government always claimed very big numbers. Still, the constitutional referendum failed to get even 50% of the vote. So one of the things I think that's critical for USAID to support, and I suspect if they don't do it, nobody will, is what's either political engagement or civic participation. I'm not sure which of the two. But if you look at Iraq, I think some of the things that were done by U.S. government in Iraq to try to boost voter participation and voter turnout, very good lessons that we can translate pretty easily over to Egypt. Those lessons being, as we just heard a moment ago, using Egyptian groups, using indigenous groups who speak or have connections to particular sectors of the population. So using minority-based civil society groups in Egypt to try to make certain there's a turnout among the minority community, and that they know what it is they're voting on, and that they know how to vote. And the same women's groups, youth groups. That's going to be something, again, I suspect if the U.S. government doesn't do it, the money's just not going to be there for large-scale voter education campaigns. Something else that I think probably U.S. government is going to need to really focus on is economic development, which I know that is an intent. But I would say not economic development only in the way that we see it done in any country, but economic development that, let me see how I would want to phrase this. One of the things that I heard when I met with all the different groups in Egypt over the last couple of months, no one said, now that we have removed President Mubarak, we can have jobs. That's not what people were saying. People were saying, we want greater liberties. We want to be certain that we have our liberties and these rights enshrined. And I think there's a tendency in the region to think that economics really drove a lot of this, and that would not be entirely accurate in my opinion. I think there was a real demand for freedom going on here, not just an idea of, we don't have jobs or we're underemployed. So as we do economic development, I would just say it has to be seen as one of the legs of support to what's going on in Egypt and not the priority concern for U.S. government. One of the things IRI is doing in this regard is we are working with the political parties and the political groups to focus them on the idea of economic platforms within their economic planks within their party platforms for the election. This is going to be an election where people will need to speak to issues, I believe, instead of personalities or to any other kind of sectarian-based appeal. Lastly, two other things very, very quickly. I think a priority needs to be supporting the new parliament when it comes in. I think when we look at Afghanistan, we see that the parliament is a very weak counterweight to President Karzai. And I think that's something that we have identified as a problem in the country of Afghanistan. It's going to be the same case in Egypt. The tendency is going to be to lean back towards a strong man. And again, the country doesn't need another strong man. They need strong institutions. And I think this will be a new parliament that's going to be rewriting the Constitution. it's going to need to be shored up and supported. Lastly, let me just say that in both Tunisia and Egypt, one of the things that I very often heard was about regional inequities within the country and how the capitals, Tunis, Cairo, things are different there than they are in Upper Egypt or they are in the rural parts of Tunisia. And I think there was a real degree of regional resentment, regional inequities driving some of the things that we saw in February, January. And so I would just recommend that the program not get caught up. U.S. government funding doesn't allow itself to be trapped by the Cairo groups only, but be certain that it's doing something that is taking a footprint across the entire country. So with that, I'll stop and happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Tom and Hady. Hady, why don't you both stay here at the podium? Unfortunately, we don't have a table, so we invite our speakers to the podium, and they stand side by side.
There you go.
Hopefully you get along.
Just like the press conference last night.
That's right. Well, hopefully it won't be the same kind of pressure as a press conference. But I'm sure we have lots of questions today. We'll open the floor, and please state your name and affiliation. But before we begin, let me just get things going. Hady, you spelled out some of the new priorities for USAID funding in Egypt, talked about monies being moved around and diverted toward these new priorities. Can you just flesh out a little bit more where you're at, how far along you are in this process of soliciting proposals, and also for both Tom and Hady, you addressed it a little bit. What is that balance between economic development, which is sort of critical to the well-being of Egypt, and, of course, directing money toward democracy? Both are needed. Which is most important? Where should monies go first?
Right. Okay. So, I mean, first of all, where we are in the process, I didn't want to get into too much detail earlier, but I'm happy to discuss it. I mean, we have had already, I believe, 4, maybe more, sort of town hall discussions in English and in Arabic, in Cairo and outside of Cairo, and we had such an overwhelming response. We've had, I'm told over 1,000 NGO leaders came to meet with us to just sort of get information about how to apply, and that process is going on now through the end of April. And so we expect to really, we're in the process of evaluating some proposals that have come in, but we're also in the process of, the doors are still open for that, and we hope that that continues. And it's really been, in talking to my colleagues in USAID in Egypt, they thought this was a good idea, but they didn't realize how much excitement and enthusiasm it would generate. And so that's where we are. As I said, we've had stuff in Cairo and Alexandria, and we're going to up the Nile to Upper Egypt to Luxor to do more of these sort of town hall discussions and information sharing sessions. And in terms of democracy assistance versus economic growth, you need to have both. You can't have one without the other, and so that's why our focus is really on both of those. Maybe I'll grab some water. My allergies are apparently starting to kick in. I think we need to have both of it, and that's why we're really devoting very significant chunks of money to both.
How significant? What are the chunks?
Well, we are, Matt, correct me, are we talking about 165 or 150? 150. Okay, so, basically, money in government is so interesting. But, we are estimating $100 million for economic growth and $50 million for democracy and governance work right now. And, we're trying to stay flexible to see how proposals come in, but that's what we notified Congress on.